Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are trying to stave off elimination around here, so hats off to Zach Eflin. Luke and I will be gathering next Friday. Today is his birthday, so if you see Luke at the ballpark, he got a press pass for his birthday. Give him some cake. I thought about some creative way to send you crab cake today, down from Fadley's, but I probably could do that. Our friends at the Maryland Lottery are powering us up. We're going to celebrate Luke's birthday with a crab cake and pizza and pepperoni pizza and probably some ice cream, maybe a milkshake over there at the ice cream bar at Pizza John's in Essex. We'll be at Back River Neck Road next Friday. I will have Raven scratch-offs to give away. Our friends at Jiffy Lube will power us up and get us there at Jiffy Lube Multicare. Also, our Maryland Oyster Tour in progress with our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, 1-800-CLEAN-WATER, as well as Curio Wellness in Foreign Daughter. I'm wearing what's over here? Oh, give me an O. Certainly an O was what the Orioles had offensively in game one. Luke will be down there for the Zach Eflin thing. We talked a lot of offense. We talked defense. We even mentioned Mike Messina and Joe Table and Armando Benitez. We didn't mention the late, great Tony Fernandez, but he was the culprit in all that. 27 years ago. You were 14, dude. I mean, look at you. You're a grown-ass man here, and we still can't get hits. The crowds. We talked a lot of baseball. You know, anybody wants to hear offense, defense, Zach Eflin. I wrote a letter to David Rubenstein. I have been banned all season. He owns the team. His people, quite frankly, have been no better to me than the other people were. In the same result, I don't like being mistreated, and I don't deserve to be mistreated. I've never mistreated anyone. Ask around. I don't mistreat people. I'm 56, and being treated like a chump by Chris Ullman and Greg Bader and the people that credential you and don't credential me, it upsets me. It upsets my family. I think it upsets you. It should upset you. And I think I don't know how you're treated when you're there. I don't know that they associate my poor treatment with how you've been treated over the last 15, 16 years doing this for me, or with me, I say. But I know why I'm angry. You know, I was assaulted. They didn't pay their bill. The dead guy who I don't like talking about that didn't treat me very well. Didn't treat a lot of people really well. And on a day when they're playing a baseball game and it started the day at 30, then it went to 25, then it went to 22, then it went to 18, then it went to 15, then it went to 12. It wasn't expensive to begin with. It was expensive last week. And Luke, I'm just going to say, I'll let you do whatever, because I had a lot. There's 8,000 words there for David Rubenstein. You can go read, as well as all of it. And how I feel is one thing. And I always say that. This isn't about me. And I said this back in 2006. This is about how empty the stadium is. And as a guy who sells sports for a living, which is all I've really done, is tried to help these creep billionaires make more money by giving them more money, by talking about how awesome they are and shining up, polishing their stone so they can all make millions of dollars. While you and I, make a living. And the notion that nobody wanted to go to the game on Monday, that tickets were $20, $15, $10, and there were empty seats, and the rain, kids are at school, it's an afternoon, like all of the, I might get mugged, like all of that. I'm blown away. Maybe not, but I am shocked that the Lemmings didn't come back to the lights. And I think Katie Griggs, and I wrote this letter, they've done a lot of damage. Peter Angelos really, really damaged baseball in our community, damaged the Orioles, damaged his own brand, and he's now left this turd for Rubenstein and Katie Griggs and everyone else to try to figure out how you put the band back together. Because the one thing we talked about in the last segment, the last time there was a 1-0 game there 27 years ago, it was a long time ago. There were no Nationals, any of that. Tickets were also expensive. If you wanted to go to Game 6 of the 1997 World Series, and I remember I went with Jeff Grossman from Norris Ford and Mr. Luttrell, and I sat in the club level, which I never sat in the club level, really. A friend of mine had tickets. I was in the second row, right above the third base, the on-deck circle, the third base side, right above the dugout. I remember exactly where I sat for 12 of those innings that day in the twilight, Mike Messina. But there were 49,000 49. It'll be the biggest crowd in the history of the stadium, because they're gonna make the stadium smaller. First thing Katie Griggs is gonna do is make the stadium smaller. I don't know, man. I'm shocked that there were that many seats available for 10, 15, $20 and that people didn't want to sit in them. Maybe you'll be the voice of reason. You shouldn't be shocked. Have you seen what's going on here? Because I can say all that because I've lived it. And there's one guy that wanted to go to the game they wouldn't let in, who serves 100,000 of their fans and their listeners. And I had to write about that. So there's my squeal on it. But why didn't everybody else want to go? That's really the story.
Well, look, I'm going to offer the same caveat I always do when I comment on attendance, and it's frankly not a topic I feel overly comfortable discussing without choosing my words carefully because this is my livelihood, and I rearrange my schedule to work and to cover these teams for a living. I do not pay to go. I do not have season tickets. I am not going to preach, and I'm not suggesting you are either, preach to anyone how they should spend their precious disposable income. So with that caveat provided, I do want to say this. You are comparing apples to oranges in terms of Game 6 of the 1997 ALCS to the first game of a wild card series. We've added a round to the playoffs.
But people haven't reached into their wallets here to pay.
Sure.
Like I get that Houston's empty.
No,
I get that Houston's
that was just
empty.
my first point.
Right, yeah.
That's just my first point. Let me continue. I think, first of all, I don't think it's that people don't want to go, because we also need to recognize here. Look, putting aside the safety of the city and like that part that's persisted now as far as perception for really the last 10 years, a post Freddie Gray Baltimore world, that's been a part of the narrative, true, half true, or completely false, right? I mean, that's just
by the way, the city put out numbers literally on Tuesday. Murders are down like 40. The crime is down, but go ahead. Yes.
But I'm putting that part of the discussion aside because I don't think it applies. That, if you want to say that about a Tuesday night in April when they're playing the Kansas City Royals, that was a bad example. Not Kansas City, just the Chicago White Sox, let's say, since they're terrible. So putting that part of it aside, we do also have to understand these games that are played at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or there was a game that started, at 2 in Houston. These games that are set in a very short period of time. They are not at a convenient time for anyone who isn't retired, super rich, or has very flexible employment. I can say, as someone who was a teacher out of college for 5 years before I transitioned into sports media, I got 3 personal days a year. I longed for the Orioles to be back in the postseason after I didn't get a chance to go in 96 and 97. The first ever Orioles postseason game that I watched was as a media member in 2012 in the division series against the Yankees in person. So we have to understand that I have friends who wanted to go. They can't make a Tuesday afternoon work. Now, let me be clear. And I'm not
96 and 97, your dad might have not had the financial means to even find a ticket or get a ticket.
We basically had friends who we could get tickets who were generous enough to not gift them to us. I don't want to suggest that, but we had some connections that we could get it in a more affordable way because, we certainly couldn't.
Did you go to playoff games in 96 and 97?
No, I just told you
that's why I said you didn't get to go. Right. Okay. Right.
Exactly. And we wanted to go. So I want to make clear about that. So you have that. You've now added an extra series of games potentially to the menu of games as an Orioles fan to attend games at Oriole Park in October. So let's say right now that the Orioles win today or win on Wednesday. They win on Thursday in advance, right? So they would have the potential to host 3 games at Camden Yards in the wild card series, 2 games in the division series, presumably 3 games in the LCS, although there would be a scenario where they could host 4 and have home field. And then same thing in the World Series, 3 or potentially, but less likely 4. So you're talking about up to 11, maybe 12 games that you could potentially buy as a fan. That's expensive. Now, Tuesday, the price shrunk. But again, not everyone in your fan base is flexible enough to do that. Even in a year where, like last year, the Orioles had home field. You're talking about 3 in the division series, 3 in the LCS, or 4 in the LCS, 4 in the World Series. So you have a lot of games there. there's a lot of money, a lot of disposable income that goes into that. You have an organization, and this will tie into one of my bigger points here in a moment. I'm trying not to dance around this, but I'm trying to spell this out because I think this is way more nuanced than solely blaming the Orioles for the last 30 years and really 40 years of, my lifetime. They've been really lousy, except for about 5 or 6 years. Maybe if add a couple more than that where they just missed the playoffs. Point is, it's been very little to write home about. As much as we celebrate and prop up 66 through 83, everything since then, save for a handful of years, has been mediocre to garbage. That's a long time. But, you have that. So you have a fan base that also, even season ticket holders, mind you, and I know people personally who felt this way back in, what was it, late August, when they jacked up season ticket rates. And in concert, they also reduced some of the perks of being a season ticket holder. That was a colossal faux pas in terms of perception and fan relations and PR and all of that. So you have that, which is a fresh misstep. This is a David Rubenstein era misstep. So you have that. And let's also call
Peter's dead. I can't blame him for anything anymore, right? I mean, but I can blame him a little bit that there were empty seats. I mean,
I'll get to that. To that. They also had a very mediocre second half of the season. So as much as people were enthusiastic late into 22 and that rolled into 23, although they had a bump in attendance last year, but it wasn't, I have the numbers in front of me. And again, these are public, the numbers they claim. All teams fudge the numbers, whether that's right or wrong. That's kind of how it works. But in 2022, the Orioles had averaged 17,543. In 2023, it went up to 23,911. In 2024, it jumped to 28,514. So it's not as though there hasn't been growth. They're 19th in attendance this year. They were 21st a year ago. And in 22, they were 23rd. So there's been growth, but there has been league-wide growth. The pitch clock, for example, has been a welcome addition for Major League Baseball. We can debate how good that's been for pitching and the health of elbows and whatnot, but it clearly has had a positive impact in terms of interest, and I think that reflects in attendance and numbers. Have the Orioles grown as dramatically as anyone who supports the Orioles and certainly the organization itself would have liked, considering the jump they've made from 110 losses in 2021 till now? I would say no. But that's now, where we look at that, we look at a mediocre second half that, let's face it, everyone was talking about the Orioles maybe challenging the 70 and 69 Orioles for 108, 109, 110 wins when they were 24 games over 500 in June. They played sub 500 baseball the rest of the way. They were 500 in the second half, and that was because of a 5-1 finish. So, look, let's not act like enthusiasm for the club was at an all-time high going into this month of October. There was a lot of disappointment. A lot of that buzz was zapped.
I would agree with you. We've spent most of September thinking they can't win the World Series.
Right.
We spent most of April and May and June thinking they were going to win the division and they wouldn't be playing until Saturday night.
Right. So when you have that coupled with what I mentioned about a sizable portion of any fan base, but talking about the Orioles specifically, who have disposable income and only so many days they can take off work, may not be in a position where they can just take off on a whim, unless you're going to call in sick and run the risk of your boss seeing you on TV, a la Ferris Bueller, right? So it's not as flexible. And I think there were plenty of people, and some of this is anecdotal, but I think it's also just common sense that we're waiting to say, you know what? If they advance, then hey, I'm all in on seeing them play the Yankees next week. And if they advance, you better believe I'm all in on, and I'll even fork out $500 for an LCS ticket, right? I'll even shell out $1,000 for a World Series ticket to see them for the first time in my lifetime or the first time in 4 decades in the World Series. So I think all of those factors I just mentioned are absolutely variables. And
by the way, there were 70,000 people that were out drinking Sunday night, putting money in, and just sort of like they're not coming back Tuesday afternoon, right? Like there's also that.
And if the Ravens started playing Tuesday afternoon games that with flexible scheduling and you don't know the time of the game until 2 days late or 2 days ahead of time, they'd have empty seats. We've
Dude,
talked
I
about
had
empty seats.
hundreds of friends that spent 3 days down, including my kid and his wife, getting pissed on at the beach all night on the sand. Three days. Everybody was sore on Monday that went down to the beach. So
So
there's a lot of ways. Look, to your point, 1979, there was the Orioles and I don't know, Kiss. There wasn't a whole lot of ways to spend your money, places to go, and this goes back to my letter to David Rubenstein. Y'all
and
got work to do. Y'all got work to do.
right. I was just those are you just said what were going to be my last 2 points. Go back to the Orioles of the 60s and the 70s. There were playoff games that weren't sold out. And look, I'm not saying that as a commentary of, oh, well, Baltimore's not as good of a baseball town as Philadelphia or New York or Boston or Los Angeles. No, it's not about that, right? If we want to rank the passion of fan bases, I mean, that's a discussion that I really wouldn't want to have, but that's something we would do in February
A
because there's
lot of
nothing
times,
going
I
on.
mean, Luke, a lot of
But
times, and look, I'm a cheapskate too, right? A lot of times it's a price point issue. I
it
have
is.
literally, I've seen the Rolling Stones a lot. You know that. There have been 3 times that I've driven or flown. I was in San Diego to see the Rolling Stones, and the tickets were $250 to go to a baseball stadium. My wife and I listened for 3 songs outside. We went and had dinner. I wasn't spending $500 to see the Stones that night. When it's $80 or $100, I will go. You know this.
Sure.
I think the price point on the Oriole thing was out of whack. Like I
Yeah.
looked at it last week. I'm like, what planet did you come from? Seattle, Katie? Where are you from? Where you think people are going to spend $125 at you're going to be lucky to get 48,000 people down there if you gave them tickets for free because they got to get off. They're saving their money. They went to the game. They were at the beach. All the things we just said, right? But once the price point came down that it's 20, $30, it's a playoff game, weather's clearing, Burns is pitching, tickets are available. All I got to do is click and go down there. You mean you and your dad didn't have that ability in 96 and 97 to just say, oh, tickets are available. I can just go. It's that easy to get a ticket. And it's
But you
it's
still have to take off work.
affordable.
But you still
Yeah.
have to take off work.
I
And
understand. I mean, and I'm
right,
here, and,
right.
and I,
So,
I think it'll be worse today, by the way. The game, too, I just don't think people are going to rush down there. They didn't rush down to give 15 or $20 yesterday. Why are they going to give 30 or 40 today to watch them get eliminated? They can't eliminate a team in game 2. So
or
I go
or,
ahead.
or you
Keep
might
going.
have or you could also, I think that might end up happening. I'm not convinced though, because game 2 does have when you buy tickets ahead of time, game 2 has the connotation of you might get to watch them celebrate and clinch on the field before you know it, right? And if you have the ticket, I don't necessarily think you're just dumping it because you think it's over.
I think for
Although
a lot
some
of people,
people,
it's just what they get off. And
and again,
it used to be, when can I get a ticket? Now it's, I can get a ticket anywhere I want. How much do I want to spend? And do I really want to
still,
go? And right.
well, and you just said something, and this is going to be my final point. Look, this is way more nuanced than, and I'm not picking on anyone in particular because I came home, I wrote my column for BaltimorePositive.com, and then I went to bed, and then we were up early on Wednesday morning,
Getting after it again.
giving a little inside baseball. So I didn't have a chance to browse what any media, fan blogs, anyone would have written about attendance. There's a tendency for it to be low hanging fruit to just say, oh, well, this fan base, boy, you guys are bandwagon jumpers, or boy, you guys don't give a hoot about it. But and I think that's largely bunk, and I think there's always way more nuance. There are way more variables at work here than anyone wants to admit. And again, that's why me and my ivory tower, as someone who is paid to go out to Camden Yards on average 60 or 65 or sometimes more than that times a year. So I always want to tread carefully. But you just said something, and this is where it goes back to what's happened over the last 40 years, but more specifically over the last 30 years, from the time that Peter Angelos bought the team in 93 to the time that John Angelos took control with Peter's health failing, and then certainly with ownership having changed hands this past calendar year. A lot of damage was done over that time. And I don't mean that in terms of people in this town hate the Orioles. I think you do find people that moved on from baseball in the way that the pandemic kind of brought this to the forefront. I think we all, at a time when our lives were turned upside down for the better part of a couple years, I think everyone, there were a lot of people out there who readjusted their priorities. And I'm not talking about baseball or even sports, just in a general sense, what was important to them. Certainly financial impact. But when you have something that was once such a treasured brand, and we even talked about it for as much as we romanticized the days of Brooks and Frank and Boog and Jim Palmer and Cal Ripken and Eddie later on, it's not like Memorial Stadium was sold out every night, and it's not like those postseason games were even sold out. There were times for World Series games. I've seen it. I've seen the replays on NASN for some of the 1970. You could look. There were empty seats at Memorial Stadium as the Orioles are getting ready to clinch. So that's apples to oranges. But my point is that was a long, long, long time ago. I joke about it a lot, but I'm 41 years old. I've never seen the Orioles play in the World Series, and I'm not counting me being in diapers as a 2-week old when my dad was holding me in my parents' living room, in 1983, 2 weeks after I was born. I've never seen that. I'm 41 now. I've only seen the Orioles in the playoffs. What? 96, 97, 12, 14, 16, 23, 24. That's two hands with fingers left over. And then when you pair that with what was truly bad ownership, with missteps, such as firing Davey Johnson, not bringing back John Miller, who, by the way, we didn't spend any time on it, but there was a great piece in The Athletic about John Miller coming back to Baltimore a couple weeks ago. I recommend anyone check it out. Not, nothing that was I don't think it covered any new territory, but as a reminder for someone like me, John Miller was my generation's Chuck Thompson, and Peter Angelos, that was gone. All the missteps, and we don't need to rehash it over the next for 20 minutes.
God, my God, I talked
it.
about it the last 30 years, right? Literally.
Sure. But I think in the process of all of that playing out, talking about the other lack of success on the field and the missteps and bad decision making off the field, it's not so much that people hate the Orioles, or not even that they don't care about them at all, but I think that era prompted a lot of people to revisit their priorities, to the point that if you only have a couple paid off days in your employment situation, and you only have so much disposable income to do anything, whether it's Ravens tickets, Orioles tickets, Maryland football, Maryland basketball, you love going to the movies, you love going to concerts, like you only have so much, right? I mean, again, unless these games are fine for people who are rich, retired, or just have extraordinary employment flexibility. That's a relatively small percentage. And then you get into the fact that Baltimore is not a gigantic market. We know that. It's just your pool of people. If the same thing happens in New York and the Yankees are a wild card team hosting wild card games, you know what? Ballpark's probably sold out. But the percentage of fans that are able to go compared to what the New York metropolitan area's footprint to what their base is in that area is absolutely a way smaller percentage than what it would be if it was a 7 o'clock game that you had plenty of time to plan for. So my point is, when you have something that was so bad, so damaged for such a long time, you wonder how much people care about it. And when I say that, I don't mean they don't care about it at all. But considering all of those inconveniences I just mentioned, how much are you willing to go through? And I think what we saw on Tuesday was a symptom of some of that. And I think that's why, and you and I have talked about this a lot. And again, you have talked about this in greater length than me. And I try to I'm busy trying to keep up with us on the field. I mean, my head's still spinning, recovering from Sunday night and no sleep, and not really getting to give it as much oxygen to the Ravens game as I typically do, but because I was going right into baseball, and that's fine. I'm not complaining about that. But I think what we see here does speak to there's still a lot of work to be done to repair and rebuild and kind of regenerate this brand that on the field, despite what happened Tuesday and despite what's happened in the second half, is still very much trending upward in terms of the talent. And this is the first time they've been in the playoffs back-to-back years since 96 and 97. It's the first time they've won 90-plus games in back-to-back years since 82 and 83. These are the good old days in terms of, for someone like me who did not actually experience the good old days. But boy, there's a lot of damage done for a long time, and they've got to continue to recruit people. I said this to you when we were texting about this. Again, another inside baseball moment that I'll share. When you said to me how shocked you were, and look, I was surprised. but I can't say that I was 1000% stunned that oh my gosh, I can't believe that this would happen
I thought when the ticket started
because
to really go down, people would it would have
it
been
does.
lemmings. It I
No, I
and there was a lot of walk up. I mean, they probably did
sure.
sell 5,000 tickets
I'm
in the
sure they
morning
did.
on Tuesday. They just didn't sell 12. And really, and this is shame, shame, shame. And Joe Enoch pointed this out. They scalp their own tickets. They're
Sure.
their own
Sure.
scalpers.
They've done
They're
that for
trying to
years.
figure out how to squeeze $100 out of tickets that used to be 30 last week, and the fans just everything you just said, whether it anywhere from me, which is F you, to I got to work, or I'm not that interested, or
I
I'll go
can't get
next
off.
week, or
I can
whatever,
only afford 2 playoff games, and I don't want it to be a wild card one,
wherever, or
right?
I blew $300 on the Ravens on Sunday night, whatever, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know, but it felt to me like the price point, the urgency of the game, their ability to win, Burns on the hill, the whole me too means something completely different, but I want to be there too. I want to be there. I want, and it's $20. I mean, at 100
Yeah.
bucks, I'm out. At $20, I'm in. And
Right.
that's my concert thing. I mean, I went to see the Pretenders a couple months ago. I paid $30 for eighth row tickets at the Warner. If it's 125 bucks, I don't go. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of concerts you see me out at, and you're like, oh, Nestor goes to a lot of concerts. No, I go to the ones when the tickets are 20, 30, $40. When it's 130, 150, 180, I look at it and say, my wife, it's not a $400 night. It's just not. And I don't
Yeah.
think that Tuesday afternoon game was $100 experience for me. Tickets were $12 at game time. It certainly was a $20 experience or a $25 experience, and affordable, and the price
Right.
of a movie, or whatever you would say. So they took the price out at the end after the damage was done. Luke, I was at the Beaumont the other night after the game. I had to pick my wife up at the airport. So when the game ended, I went right to the airport. We went to Catonsville. There were 8 people at the bar, and the bar only seats like 10. It's a little Beaumont. I'm gonna take you over there
Mhm.
for a delicious steak and burger. Great lamb chops. But every person at the bar was wearing orange. Not my fantastic Curio orange, but orange. And they all had hats backwards, and they were beaten down. It was an hour after the game, hour and a half after the game, at 8:30. And everyone at the bar was bitching about what they paid for their ticket. I paid $125. I'm pissed. They ripped me off. Now there's that. Now that,
Right.
like,
Well,
literally, I heard that. And it wasn't, we didn't get a hit and they suck and I don't love the aura. It was, they ripped me off. The guy next to me paid 12. Now, you don't think that on a plane? I don't feel that. I mean, at the ELO concert where Ed Stilk and I got 2 tickets in the eighth row for $35 in Philly 2 weeks ago, when I paid 150 for a ticket 3 years ago because I really wanted to see Jeff Lynne. We're all around and we're all like, yeah, I got it. I got $40. You paid $40 today too. Some poor bastard paid $600 sitting next to us. Literally, because it's the eighth row and it's the premium VIP. This scalping, this dynamic pricing, and the scalping of your own tickets, it's one thing for Taylor Swift to do it and have people pissed off. People were pissed at Springsteen, man. I mean,
yeah.
the guy who dedicated his life to Springsteen, the way I've dedicated my life to these baseball teams. Back Streets was the name of his publication. He did it for 40. He died a couple weeks ago. I want to speak about him the right way because I read his work. Once there was a website in 1999 dedicated to Bruce Springsteen's tour, Backstreets was the fan place to do it, right? He got so pissed he shut the website down. 3 years ago, at the age of 70, whatever, after chasing Bruce for 50 years, said, you're going to charge people $1,000 to see your, like, I'm a fan and I go on and I get this dynamic pricing where you're trying to charge me $800 for a stadium show ticket, Taylor Swift pricing. F you, Springsteen. F you, Bruce. A lot of that went on. And when I went to the first show of that tour, I was tailgating outside in Tampa, outside drinking. Everyone that was there was hardcore. It was the first time Bruce had played in 7, 8 years. Everyone was pissed at Bruce. They're there. They flew in. They got a ticket, but they're like, the only one I'm doing. And you got to be really careful. You got to be really
Sure.
that's my thing. You got
Sure.
and again, they're banning me and allowing you in today. They're banning the Venezuelan guy and letting you in, and then they call me and yell at me for saying I'm Venezuelan and you're Caucasian. And I'm like, well, what makes him different than me? Well, how dare you? Okay, how dare you? F you, your stadium's empty. What's wrong with you people? What's wrong with you people? This is a new owner. Angelos is dead. I haven't done anything to David Rubenstein or any of his people other than love and promote his baseball team, and I'm being treated like garbage. And everyone in my audience, everyone listening, I want you to know how they treat me because they would treat you the same way if you had a radio station and you were me. And they better, not they better, he's a billionaire. He doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about you. They don't care about anybody. He bought the team to love himself because that's what billionaires do. I've seen this my whole I'm 56 years old. I recognize what I'm seeing here, and I don't think they're going to change much, do much. They hired this woman from Seattle who doesn't really know where Charles Street is. I don't know how quickly you can salve whatever that wound is, but they open new wounds by scalping their own fans on Tuesday that the people that paid full price are pissed.
Yeah.
And that
Well,
goes back to the Springsteen story of man, 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 don't come on now. These are the good times. And they lost, and we're going to feel bad about that. But I feel the worst that their brand, well, maybe the best because it says you've got work to do. Now, whether Greg Bader will never acknowledge that. It was a bad school day and the game. Like, they'll have excuses inside. And that's why I wrote. I hope you don't blame this on the weather. I hope you don't blame this on the start time because I've been here a long time. People should have more love for the Orioles, and they don't. And that's your fault, Greg Bader. That's your fault, David Rubenstein. That's your fault, TJ Brightman. That's on you now, Katie Griggs, whether it's not your fault, but like, do better, be better. Do better, be better was my letter to David Rubenstein because I had been treated like garbage by the new people, and I don't deserve that. And everybody, and I have no problem saying it because I'm locked out and you're in. And tickets were $12 yesterday, and they had 5,000 empty seats, and they shouldn't be doing this to me or anybody else on behalf of Peter Angelos. They shouldn't be fighting a dead man's battles. It's gross, and I'll
there
say it
are
out loud.
there are two factors, and the one you've heard me say over and over and over, and this really lends itself to what you just said when I get to the second one, but there are varying degrees of fandom. You have your people who are able to do it and want to do it and are passionate enough to do it that they have an 81 game plan, and there are people who have half the games, and people have 13 game plans, and they've had different other packages over the years. So you have that. You have people who love watching the team but don't want to go to the games, right? And are content watching it at home. And by the way, they're paying money on that because they're subscribing to Masson in some shape or form. So you have varying degrees of fandom, and in step with that is you have varying thresholds of being inconvenienced or to go out of your way to go to games and pay. And I mean, you said it. You keep focusing on the cost of the tickets. Noted. However, I would also say you can give me any number of free tickets for anything I might be interested in, but how convenient is it? If you give me free tickets, but I got to drive 3 hours, and I know, look, I'm just this is an analogy here. It depends how much I really, really like that thing. If I want to get in the car for 3 hours and go drive to do it, in the same way that, no, I'm not saying someone 3 hours away from the Orioles, but if it's a pain in the what to take off, and I'll use my school teacher example again. Anyone who's listening right now who has been a teacher or is a teacher, writing sub plans sucks. It sucks. It's a lot of work. It's very tedious. You can put out the most perfect plans and your students might misbehave or the substitute teacher might not know what they're doing. It is a pain in the butt to write sub plans. So even if the tickets are $12 but you didn't find out to the night before, or $20 until that morning, it's still not practical for me to be able to do that. So again, so much of this is fundamentally, it's this simple. They need to grow their base. They need to grow passion in this team and its fan base. As far as you think about what their base is, as far as how many people are showing up on a Wednesday night against the Chicago White Sox in May, how many people are showing up the second week of September, the San Francisco Giants in a year they're playing out the string, right? That's your season ticket base, but it's bigger than that. You've got to continue to grow, and they have grown since where they were 4 years ago, but it's got to continue. It's got to continue because there is still a lot of scar tissue. And I don't think it's like some perfect magic
The word I
fix.
used was trauma. The word I used with his representative, Chris Ullman, who you saw whistle the national anthem just perfectly. The first words I used to David Rubenstein's person was, "There's been a lot of trauma here. There's been a lot of trauma here. I buried Mike Flanagan. There's been a lot of trauma here." Um,
But
and
even when it's not that deep for people, there's still a sense of what can you continue to do to make this the thing that, boy, I have to be there. I'll give you, this is a, and I'm not trying to change the subject, but this is just a little detail that I thought was weird about Tuesday. I love Scott Van Pelt. I like watching the ESPN, the Sports Center late at night. I think he does a heck of a job. He's a Terp. He went to Memorial Stadium as a kid. I love when he has Tim Kurkjian on and he does the O's, Bo's, that whole shtick. It's great. Scott Van Pelt throwing out game one of your first playoff series. Now, that has nothing to do with ticket sales, but this is a tiny little example of it's not inspiring anyone. It's not getting anyone juiced up. Where's Adam Jones? Where's Nick Markakis? Where's J.J. Hardy, who scored the go-ahead run in the last Orioles playoff home win in the Delman Young game? Where's Cal Ripken?
behind home plate.
If you say, okay, well, we're saving Cal for later on, he can throw out more than one first pitch. Jim Palmer can throw out more than one first pitch. No one is going to sit there and say, oh, if Cal's throwing out game 5 of the ALCS or dream a moment and game
You know
3
who
of the
should have
World
thrown it
Series.
out? Dempsey.
Sure.
If I were in there, I would say
Sure.
Dempsey.
But
Dempsey would have thrown out game 1 for me.
I would have even, I would.
I don't think they get along with Dempsey well enough. They pissed Dempsey off. They've pissed off so many.
Sure.
Bordick, Dempsey, just go down the list. Terry Kraut, all these guys.
But there's plenty of people. But
there's been trauma. They need to heal things with everybody. I say Dempsey, and we're like, well, he's pissed at him. Can't have him.
You're
Aparicio,
taking this way too
he's
deep.
Pissed.
It's too deep. What I'm talking about here is trying to something that's going to energize your fan base. Like for the atmosphere there. Again, some of this is also, oh my gosh, that experience was absolutely incredible. I have to come back. I've got to get a 12-game plan, a 13-game plan. I've got to go in and convince my boss for us to get company season tickets.
By the way, I've said that about Ray Lewis not dancing. The minute Ray Lewis danced, the experience changed at the stadium. It really did.
And I was even just going to say, even if it's not a former Oriole, and it probably wouldn't have worked because the Ravens practice on Tuesday, it would have been worth reaching out to the Ravens. Hey, is there any possible way that we could get Lamar Jackson here? Is there any possible way John Harbaugh could come out and throw out the first pitch? Is there any possible way Derrick Henry, who you're giving the day off because he's sore from Tuesday, although they didn't really touch him too much in that game, that he could come out and throw out the first pitch? That, again, would have energized the crowd that's there, that for the people who were there, and yes, I get it, there were 5,000 empty seats, that would have made for a better experience.
Nobody's a fan of Scott Van Pelt to go nuts about it.
I like Scott Van Pelt, but I really like Scott. I met him. I even met him on the Delaware shore, in Dewey Beach one year and had a conversation with him. It was awesome. But ESPN's not culturally relevant to the degree that it was 20 or 25 years ago. I mean, when was the last time you turned on ESPN that wasn't a game at this point?
I haven't watched Scott Van Pelt do his show in a long time.
So what I mean by that, and I'm not picking on Scott Van Pelt. Let me be very clear. Scott Van Pelt would be a great choice for a regular season game, even a good regular season game. But your first playoff game, when you're trying to energize your fan base and make it unbelievable, there wasn't a rousing ovation for him. So again, that is a drop in the bucket compared to what we're talking about as far as attendance and growth and the brand and all that. But that's just one little example of like, really? Game 2. And I say this as someone, do you know who's thrown out the first pitch of game 2? This is better, but it's still not good enough.
I hope it's Joe Jett.
Steve Pearce.
Really?
I love Steve Pearce. If you recall, I was probably the president of the Steve Pearce fan club. And by the way, they could have used his bat against the left-handed.
Well, this shows that Rick Dempsey was unavailable.
But I just look at that and I just say these are not choices that are enhancing the in-game experience when you actually get into the ballpark. So again, those are such tiny things. I don't mean, I'm not picking on that as like some major reason why the ballpark's empty, but these are all the details that are going to matter and continue to matter that they have to get right. And I'll leave you with this final thought because I've had more to say about this than I thought I would. Because again, I really try to tread carefully. I'm not trying to preach to people how they spend their disposable income. I pointed out that these are the good old days for anyone who's under the age of, say, 45 in terms of being to the playoffs back-to-back years for only the second time in my lifetime. But I look at this and they've got a lot of work to do. They've got a brand that they've got to make people continue to care. And if there's something that if I'm David Rubenstein or anyone that's part of this new ownership group who, let's face it, are still learning what this place is all about. David Rubenstein he's even talked about this. He hasn't spent a ton of time in Baltimore in his later years. Certainly hasn't been plugged into the day to day of the team on
And
or
never
off
will
the
be.
field.
And never will be.
But,
He's a billionaire,
but,
74
well,
years old. He's
and
not
that's
coming
fine.
here and moving
However,
into Baltimore running. So whatever you blame him for, you might
however,
as well blame Katie Griggs because he's not really going to run the place. That's
Well,
obvious.
but that's when I look, if I'm a billionaire, and look, I'm not a billionaire, I'm not a millionaire, I never will be, right? And
If
that's
I
okay.
had a
I'm
million
content with my life.
dollars. Yeah.
But if I see that and I officially bought the club back in early April and took over the remaining, bought the remaining stake, later this year, earlier this year or after that, and I see that there are that many empty seats, I'm looking at that and saying, I've got to I've got to evaluate everything here. And I would hope they've done some of that, whether they're going to make changes or not. But I've got to look at everything here and say, look, things are, loss was notwithstanding, second half notwithstanding, things are certainly up from a baseball standpoint. And Mike Elias and his team have done a great job. So I'm not as concerned about that. We'll talk about payroll, things like that. But that's trended very well in the last few years. But I'm looking at something like that and saying, where are we on the business side? Where are we on the fan relations side? Where are we on the season ticket side? Where are we on price points and
How do we treat the
community
media? How
outreach
do we treat the
and
community?
media? Fine, but business, sponsorships, partnerships in the community, all of those different things. And I'm not at all suggesting that all that is all 100% bad. I've said to you over and over, there are good people that work in that organization beyond baseball. But we talked about this from the moment that we found out that David Rubenstein and his group were buying this club, that you typically see sweeping changes. I mean, when Steve Bisciotti took full control of the Ravens in '04, what happened? He hired Dick Cass, right? I mean, that happens. And Steve had been part of it for 4 years at that point in time. So that's where I think it's premature to judge in terms of, I want to see what this offseason looks like. Or is it going to be a case where largely the Angelos era people running departments and running the business and all those different things, if that's all stays in place, then I'm not sure from a brand standpoint that you have enough self-awareness of things need to continue to get better off the field, business wise, ticket wise, community outreach wise, forming partnerships. Yeah, media treatment, throw that in there. Fine. All those different things. That's all part of it that extends and is part of recruiting people and wanting to get people to say, you know what? It stinks. I got to take off work, but my gosh, I love the Orioles so much. They've been so great and they've done so many good things here on the field and they've improved off the field in a variety of ways that I can't miss it. I've got to find a way to be there. I've got to make it work. I've got to get someone to babysit my kids. I've got to get someone to cover my shift. I've got, you've got to create that urgency in people that they want to be there. And then if you do all that as much as you can, it is a smaller footprint that Baltimore has from a market standpoint. And you do have a team in DC that is absolutely part of the reality here that exists for the Orioles and the Nationals compared to just the Orioles in the 90s, right? That's a reality. It's part of it. But you can't just let that be an excuse or the weather be an excuse or the game time be an excuse. All of that has to be looked at with a discerning eye to say, we need to try to maximize this thing because, hey, the baseball team's trending up and should continue trending up, even if they take a face plant this week and it's going to be disappointing. And yeah, that'll be another challenge because you're going to try to recruit people to buy tickets in the offseason. And yeah, you've raised ticket prices, which again was a mistake to raise ticket prices and decrease the perks when you haven't won anything yet, when you haven't even won a playoff game yet. That was a mistake. That was a misstep. And then, as you mentioned, and it's a cogent point because I saw people complaining about it on social media, and I get it. People who dropped $150 on tickets, and then suddenly someone sitting next to them got theirs for 20. Yeah, they're ticking people off all over again. So they've got to be aware. And I'm not saying that these everything we just spelled out is not, they're not variables that are exclusive to Baltimore. Every market has challenges like this in some shape or
Well,
form.
baseball has a
But
challenge. That was
but
pretty
you
obvious on Tuesday, right? I mean,
well,
baseball has a problem with this round of the playoffs, not
I
getting the
mean, what
times
others,
out,
right?
playing in the middle of the day, overcharging for the tickets,
Yeah.
being over speculative, scalping their own tickets. And I mean, Houston was empty and there were $3 tickets.
And and
And those
and Houston's
fans
a way bigger
have bought World Series tickets and playoff tickets and done. Same thing with the Yankees.
and a bigger market too.
Somebody said to me the other day, where has this happened before? I'm like, happened in Atlanta all the time. Atlanta was
For
on
years they
TBS,
couldn't sell
America's
out.
team, because they were in the playoffs every year and nobody wanted to go to the first round anyway. And then by the time you get to the World Series, tickets are $800, and you're like, well, I ain't spending 800. Well, you didn't spend
Yeah.
50 last week. Well, maybe the Braves ain't as important as I thought they was. You
Yeah,
know,
and let me be clear just on that, because we've that element of it, like I would hope in terms of success, I would hope Orioles fans aren't complacent yet in terms of like they just got good a couple years ago, right? I mean, there was a lot of losing. So that's where I've said, do enjoy this. I'm not telling anyone how to spend their money. Let's be clear about that. But at the same time, don't take this for granted. We also know that even this disappointing 2024 season is a heck of a lot better than most of what we've experienced over the last 40 years. So that part of it that did apply in Atlanta where they got complacent. I mean, that was also after the Braves had been to the playoffs 10 years in a row or whatever it was. So, that part of it I'm not as moved by, but every other factor that we just talked about, from the scar tissue of 30 to 40 years of bad baseball and a lot of bad off the field stuff, including treatment of fans, that's part of it. It's not one issue. It's not two. It's not three. There are about, we just covered probably a dozen different variables that I think all have validity there. So it stinks not seeing a full ballpark. It's disappointing. That hurt. Like as someone who cares about Baltimore, I hated seeing that. At the same time, I'm not going to point the finger and blame fans, or, there's work to be done. And let me be clear. I'm not blaming David Rubenstein for that. I'm not blaming anyone, Katie Griggs. I'm not blaming the brand new people, but they do have to deal with the scar tissue of that. And that's why there's still a lot of work to be done. And that's why I am intrigued to see if there are more changes coming to this organization from a business side standpoint. Because if they're not, then, some of the missteps that we talked about, this summer with the season tickets in August and what we saw with the price point, I'm afraid that'll continue. And that's not to say that the growth will stop, but it feels like it'll cap, it'll put an unnecessary ceiling on it. It will stunt it. So, I want this to thrive, and I think it has a chance to thrive. I think this has an opportunity to truly be a clean slate, but it's not a clean slate if you keep a lot of the Angelos lieutenants in place. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. I'm not even going to name names. People know, people who care to read up on it and have followed it from that perspective have known who we're talking about for years. So
the Angelos ideology was just the fact that anybody worked under those conditions and treated people the way I was treated on his behalf. It it, I don't even know what to say, because I've walked the walk. And the arrogance, the years of losing, just the general awfulness of it. I mean, um, it kind of caught
it's
up with
very
him on
simple.
Tuesday. It was glaring. And you said scar tissue. For some people, they're still open wounds. You're there today, and I'm not. And I've
I
asked
understand,
nicely 6 months
but
ago.
you are also an outlier compared to what the fan base is, right? And I don't mean that. I'm not belittling that. I'm not dismissive of that. Of course not. But what I'm saying is that's a different entity than just talking about someone who,
I'm not the only one that
whether
was
they.
mistreated by Peter Angelos. I'm just the
I,
loudest
I
one. I
understand
know
that. I'm
tons
not.
of people that were
I'm
mistreated
just saying,
that don't yell on
Nestor.
the internet. You know what the other people did? They just went away. John
That's
Lowenstein just went to Las Vegas and was never heard from again.
I
Like,
understand, but
literally.
I'm talking
Like,
about fans. I'm talking about the
I
people that
think
are going to pay
fans have
for
gone
tickets.
away. That's my point.
Okay,
My
but
point is, fans have
but
said, "I'll go to Ocean's Calling," and I'm not that. My kid,
sure.
his last name's Aparicio. He's 40 years old. He grew up on baseball. He grew up on watching his father be mistreated. He grew up watching these people be creeps, and he's just like, it's baseball. It's old. It's white. It's slow. I'm not. I'm not that interested. I don't really care what Gunnar Gunnar Henderson doesn't care about me. Why
Well,
do I care?
I
So
mean,
that's
those people are
that's how
gonna.
my
But
40-year-old. But my kid should be a baseball fan. My kid should be. I should be able to call my kid wouldn't go down there no matter what. Like literally, if I called my kid today and said they gave both of us press passes and we're going to sit with Mr. Rubenstein because it would be an honor to sit with Mr. Rubenstein. Do you want to go? My kid would be like, no, he's not working. He's just like, no, I don't really want to do that. I don't like. I think there's a lot of that. And I saw
oh,
on
and
my Facebook people saying they lost a generation.
they did.
Would your brother go to the baseball game? You love baseball. Your
I
brother?
don't think my brother watched. He watched a little bit of the game. He's just not a baseball fan. And look, again, part of this is also we have to recognize what the
Part of
landscape of.
that is over the last 30 years, they haven't made him one. And his brother's big
I
time, right?
understand that, but part of this is also it's just the landscape of professional sports in general. The NFL is the only thing that's truly an event anymore. The Olympics, the
Okay.
World Cup, but something that happens every year. It's season. That is the only thing that's truly an event, and the ratings bear that out, right? Football or baseball, hockey, basketball, lacrosse. I mean, you have you have women's sports picking up all, but they're all niche, right? They're all something that has a certain. The challenge for the Orioles is they've got to expand that. I've said it to you. No matter what they do, they are never getting back to where they were in 1997. Like there's not going to be 3.6 million, but that doesn't mean you can't do a heck of a lot better than what it is right now. So the challenge, and this is my last point, and then I'm exhausted talking about this.
Right.
But
And you got a game to go to.
it's very simple. When you see that many empty seats for game one of a playoff series, and again, it's the wild card series, and we've talked about all the different factors, that tells me that there is a problem. It's not insurmountable. It doesn't mean it can't be remedied. It doesn't mean it can't be improved. It doesn't mean it can't be fixed. It doesn't mean that you can't recruit more and more people. We've seen baseball grow and thrive in some markets over the last 20 years, while the overall popularity of the sport has come into question. But when I see that, that tells me, and that tells me if I'm an owner or if I'm a boss, we got work to do. And we got to look at this. We got to revisit this because, that's disappointing. And it might be that in future years, if you make the improvement, there might be only 500 or 1,000 empty seats. And some of it might just be that, again, it is a smaller market, right? And there are a lot of variables at work here. No other sport has weekday afternoon postseason games. And no other sport has the volume that baseball does and puts those games on in
Well,
weekday
March Madness
afternoons.
does on those
So,
Thursdays and kind of stops the
but
world a little bit.
yeah, hey, you know what? Fair enough. Go look at those arenas in the first and second round.
Oh,
How many
they're
empty seats do you see?
always.
So again,
Yeah.
so much of this also comes back to these are TV events, right? I mean, these are TV events. So again, do what you can to improve that, grow the brand. There's absolutely work that need to do. We talked about that back in February and March, and we talked about that in April when it became official, right? And I've said to you over and over and over, I didn't expect them to make wholesale changes to the organization and the business side in the midst of a season. That makes no sense. But that's why I am interested to see what happens this offseason. And that to me will tell me if they've recognized what we saw on Tuesday and what we might end up seeing on Wednesday, and however long the Orioles. Yeah, I would suspect this won't be an issue if they advance and they're playing the Yankees and my goodness, if they advance to the ALCS and the World Series. I don't think they'll have the same issue selling out because the ballpark was full for the two games in the division series last year. It was packed. It was juiced. But I think you have to look at what you saw Tuesday and react accordingly and say, there's a problem here. There's work that needs to be done here that's beyond Adley Rutschman needs to hit the ball or they need to score some runs. There's work to be done off the field. And we knew that. So that's where, again, I'll say, was I surprised? Yes. Was I 100% stunned? 100% flabbergasted, shocked? We've talked about these issues, and you certainly have talked about them at much greater length than I have. So they've got work to do. And I hope if anything can come from that is there's some recognition and some self-awareness that there's some work to do.
Luke Jones can be found at Baltimore Luke. I am Nestor. My dear David Rubenstein letter is available, as well as my Declaration of Independence in regard to journalism and what I've endured and what I'm never going to endure as a 56-year-old. Luke is at the ballpark. I am monitoring from elsewhere, from parts unknown. I'm like the executioners. We will gather together next Friday. Hopefully the Orioles are still playing. this weekend in New York. We'll find out. Zach Eflin, game 2. Ravens scratch-offs. We will have these at Pizza John's next Friday. It's Luke's birthday. Sorry I made you talk about such dour things on your birthday. Hope they give you a victory on your birthday. We'll get together and have some cake on Thursday. Luke's at the ballpark. Baltimore Luke. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Facing elimination. Backs to the wall. Let's see how the Orioles respond.